Hey guys, Jason here with a word to the wise. I want to comment on the video I made last, tying into Isaiah 61 and Matthew 25 and Luke chapter 4, and just add on to that. And it's definitely, it goes on and on and on. I also wanted to comment on two movies that are coming out oddly around this same time, and one of them being Babylon with Brad Pitt. And if you've ever seen that whole family tree, it makes sense why he would even be in a movie kind of like that. Not saying anything about the movie, but it's just the title and the theme of the debauchery kind of thing that if you watch the preview, you see. The other one being Oppenheimer. But I'll get back to that, and I'll show you how that may tie into scripture and why it's such a tool that it wields so much power and how long it's been doing that. So let me go right into Revelation. Let me ditch that. And I'm going to read mainly right now just from chapter 16 and speak on the bowls. And the bowls, I believe, are more of the door closing. The door is starting to swing and it is closing to shut all those on the other side out. I don't want to touch too much on the MOTB, but it's the waters. And we see how in the waters is peoples, nations, and tongues. That is what the woman sits on. I hate saying the other word that is always spoken, but it is what it is. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man. And every living soul in the sea, and every living soul died in the sea. Sorry. The other one talking about the the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and the fountains of water, and they became blood. And I heard the angel of the waters say, "Thou art righteous, O Lord." I'll leave it at that just for the moment. Now, I've said in the past, if the peoples and nations and tongues are the water that the woman sits on, and that is part of the vision, not a dream, but a vision that is shown to him, and then he has a vision of the angels pouring out the bowls, the vision of the angels, and the vision of the angels blowing the trumpets and also affecting the sea and the rivers and the springs. So now, if you go into Isaiah again, I said how Isaiah chapter 1, if you go through, I think, verses 3, 4, 5, 6, all speak on how they are covered. They are covered in like a boils and sores for their sins. Not that they are covered in boils and sins, but it is like they are because their sins are so great. Now let me just move on here. So I was reading out of Isaiah chapter 61 the other day, just the very first two verses. Now I'm going into 57. The righteous perish, and no man layeth to heart, and merciful men are taken away, none considering that the righteous is taken away from the evil to come. So now I want to go down to the bottom half where it speaks about the wicked. But the wicked are like the trouble. So this is verse 20 and 21. But the wicked are like the troubled sea, when it cannot rest, whose waters cast up mire and dirt. There is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked. Referring them metaphorically as the sea that is not at rest. And the angels and the trumpets and the bowls, yes, totally can be a thing that is going to happen, where the merging of two realms of the supernatural and our so-called reality would have these things happen like as in Exodus, where maybe the two witnesses may be wielding their will and say, or just be a part of that time where they are casting the waters into blood, and these judgments that are spoken in Revelation might be similar to the things that happened in Egypt in Exodus. Now, I'll leave it at that. Now, I just want to touch on this Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is a movie. I read the summary just real quick, just a paragraph. J. Robert Oppenheimer, part of the Manhattan Project, while they're doing the A-bomb experiment, which if it is something they were really trying to create, and it is most likely a very real, I'm 95% sure that it probably was something that they were really trying to work on. But can you imagine having something like that in a lab that you have to go into and you're attaching parts onto to make it work? Thinking to yourself, like, what if we set this thing off on accident? What happens to us? What happens to the building? What happens to the city, the state? I mean, we don't know how big this thing can get. We're just trying to build it to test it. So, kind of an ill-timed movie to be bringing out right now. And I wasn't going to tie this scripture. I wanted to do this separate, and I wanted to do a movie opinion separate. But after what I just saw on the news, I'll get to, but now I see that it would not hurt to put these two together, because now the end idea, I feel, is a little greater. So, Oppenheimer, if you watch those old test footages, black and white, I think it's like 1955. I think it was after, or it might have been the whole Fat Man, Little Boy's timeline where they were trying to build that thing. Where do you do? You're testing it. I'm not trying to put a timeline on it, but if you watch those old black and white films where it's at night and they're lit up by spotlights and there's a house, and all of a sudden you see an instant burning or a heating that is making smoke come out of the wood and the shingles and the telephone poles, and the wires are all smoking, and then all of a sudden a blast comes and blows it all away. I've watched that over and over and over and over and over for almost my whole life. Now I have this idea, and now when I watch it, I look even closer and I say, well, look at those puffs of smoke coming off of things. Is that the kind of way that air and smoke react on that kind of a scale? Am I looking at a model? Well, it's a model home. It's just made fake so they could blow it up, right? So, but what's the scale of these things? And the more you watch those old footages, you got to remember there's a 1,000,000-ton fist hitting those. That would be like a 10.0 earthquake blasting by, I'm sure, easily. Yet, the camera doesn't even shake. There are some, because it's all edited footage and it's all put together, you see some that shake violently. But in many of those, where it shows the trees getting blasted and the houses, not so much, not at all. Yet, where's the lights that are lighting up this area? They must be in the air because they're lighting down if you look at the shadows. Yet, I don't see them getting knocked out before that shockwave hits. And then you start looking at things in the scene and the crispness of edges, and they're not really siding. They're just very well constructed corners. If I'm just slapping some things together just to see how it falls apart, I wouldn't go into that great a detail. But yet, in one of the houses, there's a car in the driveway, and all you see is the very front hood and the bumper shining like a diamond. So shiny. And why wouldn't you want to have that car be in sight to see what happens to a car when this happens to hit it? And the more you watch it and the more you watch it, the more it looks like it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And why would you do this at night? Why wouldn't you want to have the lit upness of the sun so you can actually see everything that you're blowing up? But they do it at night with spotlights. And here again, how do the lights stay on if there's supposed to be like some sort of a EMP that happens from these kinds of weapons? How do the lights stay on? The camera's probably gear-driven, spring-driven, mechanical, but lights, not so much. And the lights don't shake or rumble, or there's no earthquake that vibrates the lighting in the shadows or even the car sitting in the driveway. The more you think about it and the more you look at it, it looks kind of like the same footage from the moon landing, if you know what I mean. Now to get into where I think all this probably is going. Because if you remember, ABC News and the declassifying of files of the aerial phenomenon, and there's organizations that do have all this inside information that talk about, and shows like Ancient Aliens that talk about how military bases and silos are being shut down and they have to rewire and redo and rebuild the systems after UFOs come over there and all of a sudden scramble their system because they don't want to have those kinds of weapons used. Okay. All right. So now let's just do one last little point here. Now, I just watched on the news right before I came out here. I believe it was CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network, and they were talking on a quick little drop how the Pentagon is wanting to build up 4 times as many. Why? The Pentagon. Those in the know. Deep state, all that, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. Just my opinion being spoken here. But why would you make such a movie, Oppenheimer, that deals in that subject, that had that weapon used on innocent civilians, for one, that did not wish to be a part of anything that their government was doing, yet they were a part of it. And yes, it stopped the war. Manny Fishes showed a great video where he had showed a side-by-side comparison of that event versus what happened on that dock fire in Lebanon and the mushroom cloud it created. And you look at both of those, they're almost exactly the same size, and that was just a dock fire. So the weapons they have nowadays are supposedly way stronger. And when you have people who have the Satan II rocket over there, and it has 12 of those warheads that disperses over an area and releases all those at the same time, where the Poking of the Bear a year ago was talking about just 2 or 3 days after they had kicked off their little skirmish over there, how he was willing to use those kinds of weapons if anybody intercedes, especially our country. And here, now you're having this, if you've ever seen also the Wagging of the Dog with Robert De Niro and who's the other little guy? Not Martin Scorsese. Who's the little actor? I can't remember his name. In the movie with him. He's a director that Robert De Niro is trying to get on board to make propaganda during, I think it was Vietnam. And he describes how it really works versus what the people see. And here, is this the same kind of a scenario where they're just building up? Especially if they know of these interdimensional beings, are they? Extraterrestrial, intergalactic. I don't know what they would want to refer them as, but let's see. And the 7th angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne saying, "It is done." And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. Now, I don't know exactly where, but we have heard where the elements will be burned up with fervent heat. And people will say, well, that's when all of these weapons would probably be used to bring forth God's judgment. Or that's what they could say is what's happening is man is attacking man. Aliens have this technology and they're using it on us. Or we're using it and the aliens want us to not use it. They're going to stop and bring peace or stop the violence or yada, yada, yada. But whatever it is, it's not God's judgment being poured out. And the only thing I can refer to at the end of this now is what destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah was not atomic weapons. It was pure sulfur that people have found and shown that's the only place pure white sulfur can be found on earth is in Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's the only place you'll find other than around volcanic areas where rock is literally melted. And that would take, at least I've heard, at least 6,000 degrees. And they weren't being launched out of catapults onto Sodom and Gomorrah as God's judgment was being poured out on them. No, it came from heaven. So could they just be building up this narrative in everybody's head so that way they can say, this is the bear poking back. This is his allies also joining in, and they're doing this to here, there, and everywhere. That way, even in the very end, they can say, God isn't with you. God isn't real. This is all just your, a story that you guys read, that you believed your whole life, but this is all happening because we're doing it. Still in denial to the very end. I think that this stuff being spoken, that they want to bring this stuff forward and build up, yeah. Nobody's ever seen one of these things go off. They've been seen on video cameras, but nobody can say that they've seen it. And I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that'll testify that they were a part of these projects, but I don't know them either. I'll leave it at that. God bless. Just a word to the wise guys.